morning, everybody. This is Scott McDonald, and welcome to the perfect place to put a practice podcast on Dr. Demographics. We're going to jump right into this because I always try to keep these sessions to at least, no more than half an hour if I can. Now, it just came across the wires just now, and this may be kind of interesting to note. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that those states that ended their rather generous benefits that they were giving to people for job enhancements, those states that stopped early are actually not being hurt in job creation. Now, some people were assuming that you need to give a lot of benefits to people in order to keep the economy floating. But the opposite has been true. Those states that have been a little more parsimonious haven't suffered. But what is also implied in that story is that those states are not in as big a debt as states that have been very generous with their workers. Now, California and New York are those that have been very generous. Florida and Texas have not. And of course, there's a wide range after that. But the question is, who's going to recover fastest from the pandemic, and what kind of impact is that going to have upon professional practices, particularly doctors? My assumption is that those states that have been more parsimonious, in other words, they haven't given big benefits, are the ones that are recovering fastest. And if that is true, that the states that are going to be in the South, the southern part of the country, are probably going to be attracting more doctors. Now, generally, you want to go to places that are not having a lot of competition. That's ideal, I suppose. But perhaps more important than the competition is the amount of growth in new residents moving into an area and new business startups. And I believe that that's where those states are going to actually have the best result after the pandemic. Now, I'm not going to say I told you so. I did tell you so, but I'm not going to say that because that would just be, rude. Now, here's what I want to do. I'm going to share my screen if I can, which is not always as possible as one might think. And I apologize to those who are watching because you're probably thinking, that man manages his Zoom calls a lot like an elderly person. All right, maybe that's true. And let me start with what the title of our program is today. We're going to call it The Great Reshuffling. Demographers have been talking about the Great Reshuffle, and it matters a lot if you're trying to figure out where to put a practice because you want to know where the growth is going to happen, but more important, what the projected growth is going to wind up being. So let's get into this. Now, Dr. Demographics, as you know, as I always start, is about knowing where to move, start a practice or business, and promote your efforts to get the most out of your location. I am not so concerned, by the way, where things are happening this year, right now, or even next year. It's the longer term projections of what's going to happen that matter most. So where is your investment going to pay off in where you want to go? And I'm going to have a lot to say about where to put practices as well as the type of places to go. Now, here's the discussion this week that a lot of people have been asking me. They say, look, with so many people moving into our location, are they likely to make the places they're moving just like where they came from? If, for example, the economy was rather ruined in a state that has very progressive policies, are those people just going to move to my state and kind of muck it up for the rest of us? Let's talk about that for a second. In other words, they're saying, please don't Californicate my state. Here's the fact. The jury is really out if you're looking for a nice demographic statistical analysis. Are those people from other states going to change things? Now, one can assume that it happened that in Georgia, a significant number of people moved from other states and kind of changed the political landscape in Georgia. They also did the same thing in eastern Texas. So when Katrina hit, the federal government moved a large number of people into eastern Texas from Louisiana. Did it change the voting patterns in that part of the state? The answer is it did. But are those people permanently of one particular political persuasion or another? The answer is we don't know statistically, but the indications are the people who are most progressive are not the ones who made the move. The people who are more conservative, family-oriented, and dynamic, they kind of did move. That's who's there. Now, indications are that the people who voted a certain way did not make the move in the same numbers. Okay. Now, we're really going to know absolutely if this is true in California's government or governor recall, because there are some people who are saying all the conservatives in California moved out and only left a liberal population. So how's the liberal or progressive population in California going to behave? And is it going to affect your practice? Well, at least the polling as of today suggests that Governor Newsom may be in serious trouble. But we don't know that. We just know that a lot of people are moving around. And the same thing happened in New York because Governor Cuomo resigned, but in his place came a very progressive governor as well. And are the people just going to keep doing the same thing they've always done? I'm not so sure. Progressives, though, as a group, are not as inclined to pick up and move to locations that are not well settled. And in this, we can say, looking at places within California itself, that's true. The progressives did not move to Riverside County and to San Bernardino counties in the south part of the state. They are continuing, in fact, to be the only parts of the state that are really growing. Now, granted, Kern County and parts of San Diego County are doing pretty well, but we're just seeing it isn't quite like everybody's emptying out of these major progressive enclaves. The psychographic variable is what we refer to, and that is how people think and how they act as a demographic body. That's psychographics. So what they want and what they value is the measurement of what a psychographic is, and the psychographics do not appear to be changing dramatically, although the demographics have been. We are expecting that the midterm election, and that's coming up next November, is going to be the bellwether indicator of what's happening in the state. Now, some of you are saying, I got to make a move right now. I don't have time to wait a year. I get that. But if you're thinking about taking a very large practice and moving it to someplace and say, where should we go and why should we do it? I'm just saying, I can't prove to you where to go at this moment. The House, Senate, and the Speaker, on the other hand, the Speaker of the House, are all in play next year. Is Nancy Pelosi going to remain the Speaker of the House? And I can almost say with some certainty, probably not. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the House of Representatives is going to change hands just because the Speaker goes. But I'm assuming that what's happened in Afghanistan recently has motivated conservative people to say, we're not standing for this anymore. We got to make some changes. And so these bellwether changes in the House, Senate, and speakership probably going to change. The President of the United States is probably not going to change, at least at this moment. Would that have a difference as to where to put a practice? And the answer is, yeah, it certainly will, because some states, as the census is coming up and the state legislatures, which we don't often talk about, are making a decision as to where the congressional districts are drawn. It looks like the Republicans are going to pick up the House, even if nothing else happens. So we'll go on. The legislatures are really where the news is. So if you want to know where do I put a practice, what's going to matter, you have to keep an eye out for what's happening in the state legislatures. Now, I hope you're interested in politics because it does have a difference or an impact upon your practice. Yesterday, the Texas legislature passed its voting security bill, and that means some people are going to leave Texas who really like Texas. It looks like a significant number of progressives are probably going to pick up and go because they see the writing on the wall. But Texas in itself is kind of saying, no, we're not putting up with this. We're not going to keep going. So now here's my question to you. Do you think that you can suspend gravity? Can you? Is it likely that certain things are going to continue as they always have, or is there really a direction the country's taking? And is it going to have an impact upon where practices go, where businesses grow, and more importantly, perhaps, where new housing is going to go in? Now, that is a secret story in terms of demographers that we kind of know. And that is, if an area has more available and affordable housing, people are likely to move there. And I'll use this as Utah is one of the bellwether states as far as new housing is concerned. Yeah, building materials like wood and things are more expensive. And the labor to build new housing is also high. But there is a demand that is overcoming that. And Utah's a good example of how the demand is really going crazy, but not only in single family dwellings, but also in multifamily dwellings like apartments. The news is going on, in case you don't know, that the Western United States and the Southern United States are where a lot of apartment buildings are going up, and they're relatively nice. And they're put on small lots. So the buildings themselves, the apartment space, is bigger than it was. And it's having an impact on people. As that has an impact on people, I think you're going to notice more people will go to those states. Louisiana, surprisingly, even though we just had a big hurricane there, is doing great. Of course, so is Georgia, and so is Florida. And then we also have other states as well. Now, here's a couple of other facts that you ought to know about where to put a practice and how this is going to impact you. The state legislatures are in flux right now, and it's affecting how anxious they are to have new practices move there. Those that have decided, and Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, have decided they're really throwing a lot more taxes at the population, which means the state legislatures are supporting new taxation. But that may not be permanent. A lot of the state legislatures are they're changing around. And in the next election cycle, it's going to make a difference on where to put a practice. Redistricting, then, is one of those stories that nobody's talking about. Now, you probably know that every census comes out. That's really what it's all about. It's how many representatives there are, and the way that they organize the voting districts makes a difference. So if you know that Texas is getting 2, who knows, maybe even 3 more congressional districts, that makes a difference. Same thing is true in Florida. If that happens, that's a big deal. But it's not only how many places, but how the districts are drawn. Because some legislatures are drawn so that the same party will continue in power. But it looks like the Republicans this time are not going to be saying, we just want to put a lot of legislatures in and then have this go into a court battle that lasts 4 or 5 years. They're kind of saying, no, we're going to do this in a logical way and make them secure. So what they're doing is they're saying the minority population voting districts are probably going to get bigger and a little more powerful, but not all of them. Now, I want you to understand, my friends, that the national mood can change on a dime, and this has to do with where to put a practice. Oh, you may not think it does, but it does. If you're in a state that has a large number of veterans, Florida comes to mind, so does North and South Carolina. These are states, the mood of the voters can really change and change fast. And the recent activities in Afghanistan are making a lot of people start donating money for the election cycle for next year. I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm simply saying demographers are noting there's an uptick that's happened this week. Now, I want to tell you about a couple of stories that you may not think have anything whatsoever to do about where to put a practice, but in fact, they do. It is possible, I would even say almost likely, that Taiwan and China are going to go to war. China's making all kinds of noise, saber rattling. We've got aircraft carriers that are now in the South China Sea. A lot of stuff's going on, and Taiwan has said we're not going down without a fight. Now, what that means is, what happens if several million Taiwanese decide to move to the United States, and there are a lot of Taiwanese here that would be welcoming to them in their homes and in their communities? Is that going to make a difference as to where to go? Well, it does if you follow that logic I gave last week about the gateway cities. You know that Seattle happens to be one of the biggest gateway cities to Asians in the United States. The same thing is also true in San Francisco and, believe it or not, San Diego. We also know, by the way, that Texas has a very significant Southeast Asian population that will increase. So if this happens, look at those cities as being gateways that are going to change in their demographies and make them more desirable. Hyperinflation and the economy souring is another story. We are, for the first time in a very long time, considering inflation as being a major story. People are beginning to notice that gas prices have gone up a lot, and that's, granted, not included in the inflation figures for the nation. But groceries, which aren't either, are also going up, and everybody's kind of going, this is not pretty. Does that mean that people are going to change the way they vote and how they think? Yeah, I kind of think those are big stories to come out. The COVID and restrictions toward new pandemics are actually another story. several states, and by the way, several nations have decided they are locking down. And if that happens, people are likely to come to the United States from Australia, even though they have to wait for a couple of weeks. And they're not very happy about what's going on because the economy in Australia, it's strained. But where do they go? Now, if you consider Australia is really close to Southeast Asia, there's not a lot of Southeast Asian territory for Australians to go to, and the same thing with New Zealanders. Why not go to an English-speaking place that has very loose immigration policies? So trust me, we're expecting some interesting changes. There is a mega hostage crisis that has its potential in Afghanistan. It's not the only country, but it's possible that lots and lots of people will all of a sudden be taken hostage. Now, I happen to be old enough to have remembered the Iranian hostage crisis. And for those of you who weren't old enough, I want to have you trust me, it was a bad time. So are we likely to have something like that happen? Well, remember, we're talking about public mood and public opinion and how it affects where people move and how they move. And that is another issue. By the way, there's a lot of Afghanis who've come to the United States or are on their way. We may see some changes there as well. Now, I'm going to say something that may sound incendiary to you. I don't mean it to be, but this is what demographers are talking about on their blogs. And that happens to be dramatic and drastic changes in national leadership. Now, we have a president of the United States who's under tremendous stress, and he's getting close up to 80. Does that mean he's going to step down? I don't know. There are a lot of Democrats who are pretty upset with Kamala Harris right now. I don't know how serious they are and what's going to happen there. Don't know. But I do know that if we have a major change in national leadership, and I'm talking about the federal leadership, you can expect that there are going to be plenty of people who express opinions and want to do something about it. I have no idea what. Do I think they're going to revolt? I don't. But I do know that there are a lot of things that are happening in the midterm election next year, and a lot of things are in motion right now. So we'll have to see what that happens. We know that right now, California's governor, and we know is in recall, and we know that the New York governorship is not very stable right now. Those are two very big offices that affect a lot of people. I refer to this as the ripple effect. There's some ripples going on in the United States that are affecting demographics. I just thought you nice people want to know. Listen, everybody, things have happened before, and they've said, no, nothing's going to happen. And we're kind of used to the idea of severe stability in the country. That may not happen. It means that a lot of people are picking up and voting with their feet. I happen to live in Utah, and that's one of those states that it's happening. But, that's not the only state. Arizona right now is going through a huge turnover in population. Same thing is true, obviously, in Texas and Florida. But do not be too surprised if Louisiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and, Tennessee are also going through some big changes. Do I know where exactly to go? Well, I do on a local level. I can't tell you the whole state. It has happened before, and it can happen again. People vote with their feet. There are, in fact, stability and instability factors in play right now. So all I'm saying to you, because, that's why you kind of tune in, you want to know where to go and what's going to happen in the future. Stability and instability doesn't happen necessarily over the entire nation, but tends to be strongest in some cities and in some counties. I have been looking at the statistics in Oregon, particularly in Portland. By the way, I'm a huge fan of Oregon. I love it. Love the weather, like the people. But right now, if we look at Portland, that is a city of significant ripples that are going on, and instability is likely to rise this fall, and nobody seems to be able to cover it because, our news agencies are a little thinly spread and tend to be a little partisan. Is there a reason to panic? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. No, I don't believe in panic. I do not. Make good plans, find out the facts, but don't panic. Most trends, and I mean long-term trends, take longer to realize than many people assume. That's their saving grace. So we're going to see some things happen, but don't panic. Don't sell short. Don't try to get off the grid or something. Now, the people who are listening to this podcast are usually dentists and physicians. They have got good educations, and their services are going to continue to be in demand. But you're not realtors. I'm not saying realtors don't count. I'm just saying you're in the kind of thing that, trust me, you're going to be able to continue to do well. The great struggle a lot of you are having is, I want to buy a practice, but there's no practices for sale. I hear that every single day. So people are now calling me and saying, where's their growth? Where's their reduced risk? Where can I go that's a reasonable place to go? But that's a localized phenomenon, not one that I can say for the whole country, here's where to go. That's just unwise. Now, I want to tell you about the places that seem to be growing fastest right now. I'm going to try to put this up every week. I thought you'd be interested. Harriman, Utah is still growing remarkably quickly. Where's Harriman? It's somewhere between Salt Lake City and Provo, Utah, near where I live. Leander, Texas, and Little Elm, Texas, and Forney, Texas are three locations that I think, if you have no idea where to go and you happen to like Texas, would definitely be a place to consider. Bluffton, South Carolina, and Fort Mill, South Carolina are also showing statistical wonder numbers. I'm not crazy about the size of the population nor the demographic character of the population, but I'm just saying I got to bring them up because they came up on the lists this week. Queen Creek, Arizona is continuing to amaze people. That's south of Greater Phoenix. Queen Creek is just a lovely place, but you just have to be aware that it can be hot as hell. Hell, I mean the place, I'm not cursing. Now, two places in Utah that are right next to each other, Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain. Some people are saying Lehigh or Heber, they're fine places. But if you want to know where the really big growth is going in middle-class populations that might need doctors, Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain. They've just built a new, I shouldn't go into the specifics, new plants, new businesses, new warehousing units have gone into both these areas, and employment is doing, remarkably less than 2% in many places. And I also have to say, Williston, North Dakota is looking good. And you may say, North Dakota, what? Yeah, North Dakota is a nice place and it's showing a lot of promise. So let me wrap up with, if you want to get in touch with me, 833-424-6222, or go to the website at dotterdemographics.com. We have all kinds of things for you to listen to and watch. They're free and they're updated every week. So take a look at the website. Thank you so much for watching, and always love to hear from you. Thanks so much. Take care.